Clearly they felt that there was some threat to them there. There's another loud explosion that's been heard at Istanbul's Ataturk airport, according to an eyewitness, again speaking to Reuters, which has been the source of a great deal of that of our breaking news throughout the last few hours. Well, waiting patiently to speak to us again is Dr. Lisel Hintz, postdoctoral fellow at Cornell University's Einaudi Centre for International Studies. Thank you very much for waiting for us.
Absolutely.
How important is it going to be in how the Erdogan government responds to what we've seen, assuming that he is going to reassume control? It seems to be that parts of this coup, certainly in Istanbul, are quietening down. It's not over yet by any means. But given that Turkey has aspirations to join the European Union at some point, how important is his response going to be?
Well, his response is going to be vital, but I think, you know, what's going to happen, and sort of what I'm hearing from a lot of people who are experts both on the ground and that I've worked with previously, is that it's possible that what we see is going to actually strengthen the Erdogan regime. You know, whether this, as some people, you know, perhaps are putting forward, that this might be some sort of even a false flag or a staged coup attempt, whether it is or whether it's just a failed coup attempt enacted by a small military junta, as the government claims, I think in either case, this is something that's going to sort of play into the hands of the government, in the sense that there have been attempts to move towards a presidential system that consolidates power in the hands of the president, of course, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the strongest advocate of this system. So any sort of domestic instability, be it from the Kurdish side, be it from ISIS, or be it from an attempted military coup, is going to give legitimacy to calls for a stronger presidency, for a firmer hand, for sort of legitimate crackdowns on any kind of public dissent. And that's something that's going to be extremely difficult in terms of moving forward towards EU accession. Although I think it's also important to note that the current Turkish government seems to have not shown a lot of enthusiasm for the EU accession process in the last few years. So whether or not it moves forward with EU accession, and if it does, either wholeheartedly or just sort of going through the motions in order to receive concessions, as it did with the recent EU refugee negotiation deal, where it got billions of dollars in exchange for some steps towards visa liberalization and possibly moving towards EU accession. You know, that it would be very, very difficult for, I think, the EU to move forward with a Turkey that is certainly going to see a much firmer hand. And, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, if you thought we had problems with democracy up until today, or you thought you'd seen a relatively repressive government up until today, you know, wait until we see what tomorrow looks like.
Just a couple of lines that have dropped again on the Reuters. One of them saying that the private broadcaster, CNN Turk, has had to stop broadcasting. Presenters have said that soldiers are in the studio control room, so they're unable to keep broadcasting. But separately, in the central Taksim Square in Istanbul, it's been reported, Reuters quoting an eyewitness, that tens of Turkish soldiers who were involved in this attempted coup have now surrendered their weapons to armed police. So in some areas it seems that, according to these reports, some soldiers are giving up, but in other places they're carrying on. Dr. Hintz, how hopeful would you be, though, that the government in Ankara would reassess the criticisms in some quarters that there has been erosion, an erosion of the secular constitution which underpins the modern Turkey?
Well, secularism is at the sort of the heart of the Turkish constitution, and of course is one of the tasks of the Turkish military. One of the institutional or organizational tasks is to protect secularism. Now, the current constitution is from 1982, and that was a militarily written constitution following the 1980 coup, which was the last time that we saw the Turkish army roll out into the streets. So there have been a lot of constitutional packages to amend the constitution. But we haven't seen a new constitution put in place, even though that's something that the government has repeatedly said that it needs to do. And of course, one of the elements that it wants to add to the constitution is this presidential system. I think it's a very valid concern in terms of the levels of erosion of secularism and the encroachment of Islam on the public sphere. In fact, during one of the constitutional debates, an AKP supporter even said, "Oh, we should get rid of the term secularism." And whether this was sort of an attempt to rile up public opinion or whether it was something that was a serious proposition, we don't know. But it is something that is clearly of grave concern. So I think we're right to watch very carefully and to keep note of the sort of rollback of secularism in many, many different instances, in terms of alcohol restrictions, in terms of the sort of provision of religious schooling and so forth. So there's definitely been steps, institutional reforms taken to sort of roll back the secularism that we saw in the 1982 Constitution. And the new Constitution that eventually is produced, I think will certainly have quite a lot less of those, quite a lot less of that emphasis on secularism if the AKP continues to have its way.
Dr. Lisel Hintz from Cornell University, thank you very much for joining us.